Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking all of you for joining us today. It is very important for us to know that food systems has attracted so much interest of people, so much interest of press. I would also like to thank our partners from Chile, Argentina, and IDRC and Wellcome Trust. They've both embraced our ideas and have got on board towards more sustainable, healthy food systems in Latin America. Speaking of journey, today it's a day for celebration. It is our 1 year anniversary of Colansa, our community of practice for Latin America and the Caribbean. And this initial idea is getting more and more importance and has become a very interesting space of exchange of experience, knowledge, evidence. And Colansa is supported by you, researchers, physicians, lawyers, journalists, dietitians, and professionals from 18 countries from our region. I would like to invite those who have not been with us yet to come and join us. We have a joint work here today to show you what we've been doing. And as you know, Idec, Brazilian Institute of Consumers Defense, it's an association of consumers. It's a not-for-profit organization which is apartisan, and for nearly 35 years it's been working to ensure the rights of citizens and consumers. We fight for fair, sustainable relationships with consumers. In terms of food systems, we want all citizens to have access to healthy food, and we advocate for that, always focusing on the challenges and barriers ahead of us to get to our goals. Today, we are launching the document Action to or Agenda to Action, which is a kickoff process to a number of alternatives for current food systems that we have in our countries. It includes a number of recommendations towards the changes we expect to reach and how they can be reached to transform all the steps from production, post-consumption of foods into 5 dimensions: business, supply and demand, ecology, health, and governance. We know that the way these processes had been addressed in recent decades and the so-called corporate diets have been leading to sickening of the population and of the environment, which has gotten even worse as a result of climate changes, chronic diseases, which are all understood by poor eating habits affecting the lives of millions of people. COVID-19 pandemic and all its acts have also identified the frailty of food systems, the need for more sustainable, resilient, equitable systems that can feed people with real food, promoting health, distributing welcome, contributing for social justice, preserving not only the planet and natural resources, but also culture, knowledge, and the multiplicity of different ways of living. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian war is causing tragic death and also displacement of so many people, but it's also going to enhance the complications of the economic crisis and impacting all our lives, including also reduced food supply and increasing prices. Because of that, I would like to ask you all to pay attention to this material, which is really a call for action that I would like to extend to all of you. The civil society, social organizations, academia, government have to work together. Strategies have to be complementary and well coordinated. We have this potential in Latin America, and we from IDEC want to contribute further to the process. I wish you a great meeting, and I hope we can get into new synergy and more opportunities of collaboration. Thank you very much. Let me now hand it over to Soledad, who is a journalist specialized in dealing with food systems, not only in Argentina, where she comes from, but throughout the region. Thank you very much, Soledad. Thank you for your participation.
Muchas
You have the
gracias.
floor
Bueno,
now.
yo soy Soledad Barruti. Es un
Thank you
placer
very much.
estar
I'm Soledad
esta
Arrutia,
tarde con ustedes.
and I'm
Es un
delighted
placer
to be
celebrar
here.
también tener un
It is a
espacio tan
pleasure also to
interdisciplinario
celebrate
para abordar una
this
temática
very
que es tan
important day
necesaria, tan
today.
urgente como esta.
Such an
El
important
seminario
topic
se
we are
llama
addressing here.
Debatiendo avances y caminos para
We are here to
Latinoamérica.
talk
Como
about
contó Carlota, está
advances
organizado por
and
Idec
paths to Latin
y
America.
con
It was
LASA, y también cuenta con
conceived
el
by
apoyo del
Idec,
Centro Internacional de
Colansa, and
Investigaciones para
also
el
supported
Desarrollo
by
de Canadá
International
y
Center
Wellcome Trust.
of Development for Canada
Hoy lo que
and
vamos a hacer
Wellcome
es
Trust.
presentar los principales resultados de
We are
las
going to
nuevas
share with you
investigaciones sobre
the main
sistemas
results of
alimentarios
the
que fueron
investigations that
realizados
we
en
have run
Brasil, en
in
Argentina
food
y en
systems
Chile,
in Brazil,
que tiene
Argentina, and Chile,
propuestas para la construcción de
and a
modelos más
number of
saludables y
proposals for
sostenibles
creating
en
more
la producción,
sustainable
en la
models for
distribución
production
y en
and
el consumo de
distribution
alimentos
and
en toda la
consumption
región de América
of
Latina.
food in all the
La
region of
agenda de este
Latin America.
webinar también estará dedicada
Our
a celebrar,
webinar will
como
also
contó Carlota, el
focus on
aniversario, el primer aniversario de
celebrating
Conlasa.
our
La
first
coalición
year
de parceros
anniversary
para América Latina y el
as
Caribe va a compartir
partners
los
for Latin
logros que
America and
tuvo
the
en
Caribbean
2021 y
and
dar
all the
ejemplos de la
advances that we had
importancia
in
que tiene
2021,
fortalecer las redes de socios
and
y
also
actores para impulsar la
emphasizing the
transición
importance
de
of
sistemas
enhancing the
alimentarios.
role of all the players involved
Bueno,
in food
todos los
systems and food
que
systems
asisten pueden
management.
enviar preguntas
All
al
of
chat.
those
Vamos
who
a
are
elegir
with
algunas
us
de
may
ellas para que
submit
los
your
panelistas
questions through
comenten en
the
el
chat,
debate que se
and we are
dará
going to
al
allow
final
some
de
time
este
for
primer
our Q&A
panel.
sessions
Y
immediately
bueno, sin
after the
más
first
preámbulos,
panel. And with no further ado,
voy
I
a
would
invitar
like to
al primer
invite
panelista, que
our
es Guillermo
first
Paraje, que es
speaker,
profesor de
Guillermo
Economía en la Escuela
Paraje,
de Negocios
who
de la
is a
Universidad
professor of
Adolfo Ibáñez
economy
de Chile.
in
Se
the
especializa en
University of
temas de economía
Ibanez
de la
in Chile,
salud,
and he is
como
a
equidad en
specialist
salud,
in
sistemas de
health
salud y enfermedades
economics,
no transmisibles.
health
Bueno,
equity.
muchísimas gracias, Guillermo.
So
La
thank
palabra
you
es toda
very much,
suya. Vamos a
Guillermo,
escucharlo durante aproximadamente
and
15
I
minutos.
hand
Muchas
you
gracias.
over to you. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Guillermo. Ahí está.
Guillermo? Good, now we can hear you.
Cuando guste.
Bueno, muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm delighted to be part of this webinar. I was asked to share with you the results of our experience in Chile. Can you see my screen?
Sí, se ve perfectamente.
Yes, we can see it perfectly. Great. We are going to share with you the experience that we have had with this project, supported through IDRC. During this project, which took about 10 months in Chile because it started in March and was completed in January this year, there were about 25 professionals involved from different areas. We have also involved the government of Chile. We had some round tables, and everyone who was involved in this study were, well, sometimes as much as 80 people. So I'm going not only to share with you the experience that we have had in this project, but also some of the conclusions that we've drawn from bibliographic review and also an analysis, and also our impressions. I was involved at all the different levels of the project. First of all, we have to say that this is something that has really convinced me to join the project. we are dealing with a very complex topic, and it's very difficult to discuss about healthy, sustainable food systems, especially during little time, such as was the case here, because there are many dimensions that can be addressed in a topic like that, and not all of them are so obvious. And there is a scarcity of literature in developing countries. Commercial agreements, for example, use of water. Sometimes there are just what local policies or national policies, and what the literature brings is something very localized to developing countries, some specific developing countries. So it's really not easy to comprise the whole breadth of this topic based on what we currently know. For example, one topic that we emphasized a lot was inoculation. There is a reasonable movement of increasing the consumption of green leaves and vegetables. And there are countries which are producers of such products, but it still has a limitation of equity, because eating green leaf and vegetables that we treat, well, as it's always safe, is sometimes safer than in other situations. So there is always a context behind that, and some discussions which are not necessarily that had been subject of the literature. So the discussions tend to happen just at the national level. There are some topics which are only localized, such as water scarcity. Chile is a food producer, but we've been dealing with the limited water resources, fresh water and other water reservoirs. And there are some other topics which are very localized, such as, for example, the rights to the use of water that would be applicable to some regions, but not to all of them. And all of that can be considered when we are addressing food safety, such as has been in our case. So I should say that the literature does not necessarily bring more clarity to these topics, and they don't gain as much importance as they should have. So first of all, we had reviewed the literature to identify the level of knowledge that we had on some specific topics. Considering that very comprehensive area or body of knowledge, we identified some relevant issues which we thought would be the most important ones. So national and international right related to the use, for example, of natural resources, water, and others. So nutritional regulation, sustainability of marine food or fish and seafood, then food safety, especially in countries which are producers of green leaf and vegetables and fruit in general. Production sustainability, both for animal origin food or plant-based food, and also waste and loss of food. Some areas were left out. For example, green finance, which is a new topic in Chile, which is now getting more and more importance. This is something which was left out, not because they were not important, but rather because we had no time to include them in our study. In addition, we have identified programs and public policies in different specific ministries, so health, economy, environment, agriculture, social development, some ministries of the Chilean government were left out. Maybe they could have had some importance for the topic, but we decided not to include them because of lack of time. During literature review, we've come across a number of papers published and also some unpublished studies about all the topics that I've mentioned and all the dimensions that I've alluded to towards a sustainable, healthy food system. The literature is also very important to it. And in my presentations, you are going to see that fully divided, sometimes one dimension of the problem, because you see, there is no intention to correlate all the topics with other correlated topics. So they tend to stand alone. Most of the studies are standalone studies. And we've also come across a number of public programs, in fact, more than 30 programs, which are directly related with healthy, sustainable food systems. Most of them were multi-ministerial programs involving more than one ministry. So most of them had more than one ministry involved. But most of the programs just have one ministry, which is the main driver, the lead of this program, which is ultimately the ministry responsible for moving it ahead. So a health program involving also the area of agriculture, environment. But if it's a health driven program, all the responsibility is led by the Ministry of Health. So we haven't come across any programs where which had a cross-section kind of breach in which they could really be considered multidisciplinary with a number of factors.
I just mentioned the literature. There are many papers talking about healthy food systems and also sustainable food systems. But as far as I remember, we do not have any paper that actually addresses the two dimensions at once. And that is what we also find in public programs. So public programs, they either focus on what's healthy or on what is sustainable, depending on which ministry is in charge of that program. So we don't see that kind of combination before. To me, what we find in the literature, the fact that we have this concentration on specific areas, be it sustainable or healthy, there seem to be little or no interdisciplinary approach or multidisciplinary approach. For example, when we talk about a healthy food policy, does not address the economic policies or political policies, or does not relate to production or the issues or the constraints that we find for the production of those foods. One example of the papers that address nutrition, they focus on nutrition only. When they're talking about food promotion, they also focus only on that. We don't see the interdisciplinarity. We don't see other areas being also discussed. the fragmentation of the scientific production, as I mentioned, the way they address the issues, we should have a comprehensive approach, and that's why this fragmentation is also replicated in public programs that concentrate some professionals, for example, public health specialists or dietitians or physicians. For example, if it's on agriculture, we are going to find agronomists. There is little interaction between the different professionals, the different programs, and different disciplines. So these different approaches or this cross-discipline approach is not found. There are very few papers on which we have, for example, economists addressing the economic aspect of these issues. We could also talk about natural resources or the environment, for example, that is certainly related to food production and how that food reach consumers. We have interviewed stakeholders from the public sector, private sector, the academia. And obviously, their point of view is very different. Amongst those in the academia, which is probably the most informed group about the subject, once again, we observed a little communication between different disciplines. So there was not an interdisciplinary approach. I'd like to point out once again, we don't see public health specialists working with sociologists or other groups or economists, for example, which would certainly expand on the discussion of such complex subject. So when it takes a comprehensive approach, it looks like a Babel tower. The dialogue with those in the academia, those in public health, nutrition, engineers. It was very interesting to identify the different standpoints and the focus of each discipline and how they actually treated the other disciplines. So once again, this strengthens that fragmentation I mentioned earlier. So what we have is the fragmentation of knowledge.
Perdón, Guillermo, nomás interrumpo para decir que quedan
Guillermo,
unos 2
we're
minutitos
sorry,
no
but
más,
you
por
have 2
favor.
more
Así podemos
minutes
darle
to
el paso al
finish your
próximo orador.
presentation.
Muchas gracias.
So, thank you. So, as I mentioned, we talked to 2 stakeholders from different segments. They all find this issue to be extremely relevant. All of them can influence this agenda, but still in a limited way. And they are very willing to participate in such a discussion, but they expect somebody, the public sector, to kick off this discussion. NGOs and the academia do not feel that they should start this discussion. So, as I mentioned, this project was presented to the Chilean Senate so that we would have some working groups. So an average of 40 people got together once a week for 6 months, 180 hours of recorded discussion. So 4 different subjects: health, environment, sustainable production, food patterns, marketing, and distribution. 2 weeks ago, a book was also launched. All the working groups also presented or had a presentation about this subject. At the working tables, once again, we had the specializations per discipline and the point of view of different segments. Our interest was really in having a more comprehensive approach. There were some issues that were not discussed, such as the green economy, food waste, which are emergent issues. So it's important that we started now to build this comprehensive agenda. This is one of the conclusions. And it's very important that we start to develop it urgently. This was the opinion of the different actors. And there is this willingness to participate in this kind of discussion. And there's also this idea that the public sector should articulate this agenda. So, but to me, the public sector, the government, seems to have a fragmented understanding of this issue. And what we need is this comprehensive approach, a comprehensive agenda. And it's certainly that we need to have a group working in order to move ahead. Thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if you have any questions. I'll be available to entertain them. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Now let's have Daniel Maceira.
Investigador independiente de la
He
carrera
is an
del Consejo
independent
Nacional de Investigaciones
investigator
Científicas y
at
Técnicas del
the
CONICET en Argentina, profesor
Centro
titular
de
de la
Estudos de
Cátedra de
Estado de
Organización
Sociedad
Industrial de la
de
Facultad de Ciencias
Argentina, State and
Económicas de la Universidad
Society
de Buenos
Studies
Aires.
Center of
Muchas gracias,
Argentina.
Daniel. La palabra
He's
es
also
tuya.
at the University of Alfonso. Sorry, not Alfonso Ibáñez.
Ahí está.
Well, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Daniel Maceira.
Se ve perfectamente, sí.
Okay, we can see your screen. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us for this event. I'd like to particularly thank Idec and the IDRC and all the other stakeholders for participating in this meeting. You have here my contact. I'd like now to introduce and to acknowledge my working team, Veronica Gutman, Veronica Foster, the consultants, Lorena Alemandi, Eugenia Di Paola, the supporting team. And we also had the advantage of having many people participating as the supporting, considering, just as Guillermo mentioned, such challenging subject. Here we have also the IDRC project ID number. We also were funded by the International Development Research Center in Canada. We had a very broad reach. I'd like to focus on some specific issues, and the assumption was based on the 3F. We mapped the actors. We also looked for the incidents, namely Argentina, considering the international context. We also had the literature review and the state interventions. So the transition was towards health and sustainable food systems And we examined the changes in food diets, considering healthy diets, low environmental impact, environmental improvement, and also the reduction of food waste and food loss. So we had these three groups. So one addressing food production, the other one health and nutrition, and the other one addressing the environment change, climate change and the environment, and the intersection between each two and all of them. So we were challenged in order to go over the literature in which would find the intersection of these areas. So we had 34 papers on health and nutrition, 55 papers on health, nutrition, and sustainable production, another 35 on sustainable production. We then carried out another search on what we call the gray literature, and we found an interesting number of papers. With that, we ended with 164 relevant papers that were then reviewed. Here are the main findings. Similarly to what we heard from Chile, the intersection between these three worlds is very limited. And the level of specialization, for example, they focus on each area. For example, as for production, I'd say that we did not have anything related to nutrition quality nor the environment, for example. We had papers that specifically addressed the intersection between the environment and production, which is probably one of the one in which we have a largest number of papers on. And in Argentina, unlike the consumption of meat, which is very high, what we see is that there is a smaller consumption of fruits and vegetables, considering the recommendations. And we separated the consumption groups in quintiles. But this gap was found regardless of the quintile. And what we found is that 40% of the income is spent on food. We also found studies that discuss not only the environmental impact as well as how this relates to, for example, livestock or the chicken farms or swine farms, fish farming. And there is also a discussion about how to measure that, considering the different types of agribusiness. As for international trade, we went over this area, and what we found was an approach in which that was not found. For example, when we mapped the actors and the idea of economic development combined to exports, they also lack the discussion on nutrition and environmental sustainability. There is this trade-off when we think about these goals. And the question that is asked in these papers is to what extent alternate production means can meet that need of also exporting products and meeting internal demands. Out of the major challenges, it seems to me that the quality of the diet, of the mean diet, of the average diet, I should say, which presents some deficiencies. There are also some difficulties, for example, regarding the low perception of risk to health when people consume processed foods. And what we also found is that what is key is the mapping of stakeholders and the lack of consensus on the priority between the government and the different ministries. So we had that also reflects on the policies that we find, for example, in Argentina, when we consider, for example, the production agenda, foreign affairs, so there are some clear issues such as health. We also need to consider non-communicable diseases. And we also find this lack of having in-depth studies. This also implies in also foresee and approach the emergence of a conflict of interest and tensions. And in Argentina, the food guidelines in which some studies were carried out and how the subject is handled. This is also a means for us to approach and to go in depth. And when we think about challenges with regard to the production and the sharing of knowledge, we need to consider how we can increase the offer of necessary food, the role played by agroecology, and also fiscal incentives. So we need to identify which are the fiscal and non-fiscal incentives to promote that change.
It has been the need of really evolve in other guidelines. And this is why we developed the topic of programs, norms, and guidelines, and what's the role of the government in this kind of discussion. And here we have 105 mechanisms of intervention, different treats and laws and resolutions. We can categorize by type of instrument and the main purposes and different mechanisms of funding. In Chile, and we agree with what they did, which was exactly to organize it into programs and rules. Programs that really give us a different kind of understanding, but still within a different kind of discussion, and the different correlations between these dimensions can be seen as part of a constant process of discussion involving commercialization of foods, environment, health and nutrition, and production of sustainable foods. And the third, interrelation between consumption and environmental preservation. In this slide, as I show you, we can see the timeline, and we can clearly see all the different programs, rules, and regulations that have been designed and published by the government at all its three branches, showing that the country has evolved significantly in what concerns interventions at all the different levels, especially in the past 10 years from 2011 to 2021. Everything has been taken into consideration by the public policies, but we can still see a major change to the applicability, and repeating what we had said, there had been a great coordination among the different analysis. And finally, the team. The team has worked hard in mapping all the different players, in having them identified. We've relied on a semi-structured questionnaire with specific questions which served as input for the analysis. We wanted to identify players, their main interest in terms of healthy and sustainable food systems, including also alignment, what would be the position of different players, and the agenda of a healthy and sustainable food systems and their interrelation. So based on the results that we obtained from literature review, we could use it as a reference to run nearly 30 interviews. Here we can see all the different groups of players involved in these different interviews. From the discussions, we created a number of charts. Here we can see the different correlations that we have drawn in terms of environmental improvements, well-balanced diets. Each circle here represents one type of player. So public sector, private sector in red, civil society yellow. And what we have found is that there were 4 main groups resulting from the interviews with all players, and the groups show an intersection of all the different points focused on evidence-based improvement and ecology criteria-based improvement, impacting the concept of well-balanced diets and significant changes to diets. So to some extent, we can see that there is still an open space
Daniel,
for
perdón, que me quedan
dialogue, for
un
debate,
minuto
and
para
agreements that
cerrar,
we
si es
still haven't
posible.
achieved. Just 1 minute for your conclusion, please. Analysis of players. Here we have some preliminary conclusions. We can start by saying that we have a fragmented approach and ministries work not in an integrated fashion. In addition to that, all the different players or groups of players are not necessarily the traditional players, be them public or private entities. These are not necessarily the components of these groups. What we noticed is a lack of contact between the agendas of public, private sectors, and all the different groups. So as a consequence, there is not that clear, seamless dialogue with the government. At the same time, we can see that the relations between those that promote sustainable changes to productive processes, such as NGOs and others, comes together with a group that it's not very cohesive, they are not well structured, they are not very well focused. I believe there are players or organizations that could help us favor this discussion, such as the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Health and other organizations. At the same time, unions or a consumers organization are not a very active player in the discussions. But based on the 3 thematic groups, we have run a number of webinars which were running the end of November, beginning of December. And I would like to close my presentation by saying that in Argentina, we concluded that there is a presence of different diagnoses. We really have to have better understanding and clearer measurements to understand what can be the agenda for the future. On the one side, there is a discussion about malnutrition, obesity, the importance of distribution in the territory, but there is no clear prioritization by the government. No clearly urgencies were established or had been clearly set as being priorities by the government. There is this lack of appropriate strategy. And because the objectives are still being discussed, and the public sector does not really fully talk with the private sector. So there is still a lot of fragmentation. And there is no systematic dialogue, no mechanisms for that. Everything is very informal. And it's a challenge because it does not really provide us to have a clear path towards optimizing the initiatives or creating a space for influence. Finally, the main conflicts we identified are, on the one side, the national imported agenda. Argentina does have its own agenda in terms of food systems, but those who are responsible for developing guidelines just tend to rely on international agendas. At the same time, there is the problem of governance, political coherence, as I pointed out before, and it prevents us from really having a clear list of priorities. And it's even more complex because there is always this problem of implementation of regulations. This is done at local level in Argentina. And of course, each province, each city will also have its own local needs and priorities. There is also another point which concerns the models of agribusiness, to what extent they can be used towards sustainable development, really providing food to the Argentinian population. And what is this transition? What is the path that we have to all work together towards the future? It's been a very complex work, but extremely enriching to all of us. And it's especially important to emphasize really how interesting it is. Last year, we were discussing not only about sustainability, but also the quality of the food systems. And it has triggered a number of local discussions
Muchísimas
towards
gracias.
a more countrywide solution.
Bueno, ahora vamos a
Well,
seguir
thank you
con
very
Janine
much.
Gioberti
Now,
Coutinho,
I
que
would
es
like
doctora en
to give
nutrición
the
humana
floor
por la
to
Universidad de
Janine
Brasilia,
from the
coordinadora del
University
Programa
of
de Alimentación
Brasilia.
Saludable y Sostenible de Idec.
And
Bueno,
she's
Janine, la
also with
palabra es tuya.
IDEC.
Muchas
So,
gracias.
Janine Gilberto Coutinho, you have the floor now.
No tiene encendido el audio.
I'm sorry, we cannot hear you. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon. I would like to greet all of my peers here with me in this round table. Let me also greet the participants who are following us today. This is a very important topic to the Brazilian Institute of Defense of Consumers, IDAC. We are an organization that fight for the rights of people. We want people to exercise their rights in all consumption relations. And in our healthy, sustainable food discussions, we want people to be able to make better choices of foods. And to do that, we really have to influence public policies. Let me share with you my presentation. Just give me, if you allow me 1 second. Good. Can you all see my screen?
Sí. Sí, sí, sí,
Yes, we
perfectamente,
can see
Soledad.
it. Great. Thanks, Soledad. I would also like to greet and thank the team of IDEC, all our consultants who were part of this project. I think it was a very challenging project, but we are very proud of the results that we've produced. I would like to thank IDRC and Wellcome Trust, and I would like to thank Greg, Roberto, Natasha, Imori. Thank you very much. And thank you really for our very rich exchange of opinions and experience. So this is exactly what we have achieved. We are sharing with you the results of this very challenging one-year program, and at the same time, we want to celebrate the first year of Colansa. Idec and other organizations for the past 12 months have been working together to really create this great opportunity of exchange of opinions and experiences in such important topics, which involve production, commercialization, and consumption of food items. The industrialization of food chains have really contributed to sickening the population, and we have to acknowledge this fact. There's no way of agriculture producing foods with deforestation, production of large-scale commodities in large land extensions, the use of agri-chemicals, transgenic seeds, and fertilizers have impacted the environment extensively. We all have robust evidence of greenhouse emissions in Brazil and also global emission, which is very significant, clear, undebatable evidence. And we know that production of commodities such as sugar, soybean, wheat, and others are just supplies for ultra-processed foods. And we also have robust evidence that the consumption of ultra-processed food is contributing to the deterioration of the health of our population. First, we used to have evidence correlating obesity and chronic diseases. But unfortunately, the negative scenario is even worse, and now it's correlated also with mortality, early mortality, and depression, which got even worse during COVID-19 pandemic. There is also a third issue which encompasses everything with the coexistence of all pandemics, because in Brazil we are, well, large producers of food items. Agribusiness is a very important area in Brazil. But in a way that makes no sense whatsoever. In Brazil, more than half of our population is living at some level of nutritional insecurity or nutritional risks, and a very large number of people exposed to situations of lack of food. So this is why we really have to change food systems. Last year, we had the opportunity of being part of this project. I could really listen to all my colleagues presenting their findings. And there were three main initiatives at IDEC: dealing with evidence. I'm not going to go into details, but they serve as a support to all my comments, also towards our planning of actions. And we've published a literature review, which is available on IDEC's website. It's a full literature review, including over 100 publications, considering the global syndemia. We've also worked with consumers to communicate what food systems are, how they impact people's daily living. And last year, we had the Summit of Food Systems at the UN and also COP26. So in those two large international events, we were also present and communicated our message. And finally, today, we are very glad to be here after very hard work, collective initiatives. And here we are to share with you our agenda for action, a call for action. We know that it should be intersectorial. It should involve the government, the civil society, the academia, with no conflicts of interest whatsoever. We are here talking about the rights of people of having access to healthy food items with regardless of market interests. And I am also going to address it. But I know that IDEC's team has already shared with you the link where you can find the document that is being launched today.
I give you some examples on how we address the incidents, also the reports. They are available at IDEC website. We address agriculture, climate change, and here I share some of the examples, but I'd like to invite you all to access this page and go over the different reports that are available. They are very interesting. They also talk about how food is produced and the negative impact to our health and the health of our planet. We also address commercial interests of the food industry, which was discussed at the Food Summit. IDEC has already positioned itself. We have worked with the civil society. We also participated of a separate summit, and we discussed this interest of the food industry. We also address the consumption of ultra-processed foods that does not fight hunger, but that certainly aggravates social environmental crisis. I already mentioned that IDEC has participated in the mobilization of the people to transform corporate food systems. We also had the opportunity to participate in a parallel event at COP26. And we continued. Does not mean that we are going to stop working on this agenda with the end of the project. To us, this was an opportunity to open doors, to also go over the literature, gave us the opportunity to reflect so that we can continue on advocate for consumers by working together with organizations that also advocate for avoiding climate change or how to lessen that. And also last year, and always working with Colansa, we find that this is a very rich dialogue. We also launched a manifest for health and sustainable food systems. This is available at Colansa's website. This is the overview of this literature review. It was based on global syndemia, which is the coexistence of the pandemic of obesity, hunger, and climate change. We examined 5 dimensions, starting with the businesses and how the commoditization of food weakens internal supply. Today, we have updated information, and we know that there was a decrease in the production of rice, beans, and vegetables vis-à-vis the commodities, the production of commodities. And it's very important that we take action. Another dimension was supply and demand, and at the core, we have the inequality in access and food offer. It's expected that people have access to foods both physically and also economically speaking. Brazil is undergoing now a catastrophic situation. Virtually 50% of our population cannot afford buying food. There's also this ecological dimension, which is the production means, large scale related to the intensive use of agrochemicals, monoculture, livestock, and data proves that this has a strong impact on climate change. The fourth dimension is health. All these outcomes, they certainly have impact on the population's health. We see overweight, obesity, chronic diseases, an increase in mortality rates, depression. So it's important that we have a clear understanding of which measures should be implemented, particularly regarding public policies in order to stop this process. And finally, governance. Governance permeates all the other dimensions. And today, it's even more important, particularly considering the step back that we had here in Brazil, considering the food and nutrition systems, or I should say the food and nutrition safety systems that
Janine, quedan
were
2 minutos,
broken.
por favor.
2 more minutes. Thank you. So this is our agenda for action. As I have 2 minutes only, I'll try to be very objective. This document is once again made available at our website. We provide information on these 5 dimensions I just described. And I have already talked about the business dimension. So we have this concern in carefully examining how we can really ensure supply to the internal market. But that certainly takes also the incentive and funding of family-based agronomy or agriculture. Also access to healthy foods, also tax exemption or tax relief. We know that there is a high tax rate, and we need to consider how we can also use taxation, for example, on sugary foods and also ultra-processed foods. There is the environment dimension. It's urgent that we also incentivize the use of low impact on practices that have low impact on the environment and also on the sanitary dimension. Health, from the promotion of breastfeeding, as well as regulatory measures that are key so that we can protect people from having ultra-processed foods and governance. It's important to have or to advocate for the Brazilian framework, legal framework. And this was very well structured, but it was dismantled. And it's important that we soon try to restructure all the governance mechanisms, including the climate point of view, and also to address the conflict of interest and the interference of a private segment on what is of public interest. So this is our call for action. I'd like to invite all of you to take ownership of this document. And it's important that we work together. We need to unite in the pursuit for promoting this transition of food systems. It's really key. We need to ensure right to health, the right for choosing adequate nutrition. This should be ahead of economic and commercial interests.
La alimentación
Very,
es un
very
acto
clear
político, ¿no? Y cómo
how
debemos comprometernos
nutrition is a
políticamente también
political
para un
issue
sistema alimentario
and
más justo y más sano.
how we can use the politics
Bueno, vamos a
also in
seguir
order to
ahora con un
ensure
momento de
a
debate acerca de las
fairer
presentaciones de este
nutrition.
panel.
So
Bueno, voy a recordar a todos
next,
los asistentes que pueden enviar sus preguntas al chat y así vamos
first
a ir
of all,
dirigiendo
I'd like
algunas
to
de ellas
remind
para
you
que al
that you
final
can
los
send us
panelistas y
your
las panelistas
questions using
comenten.
the Q&A
Ahora
or
vamos
the
a
chat
tener
rather.
5 oradores, perdón, 3 oradores más
So now
con 5 minutos cada uno.
we
Y la primera va a
have
estar Graciela Abriata, que es
3
directora
guests.
nacional de abordaje
First,
integral de
Graciela
enfermedades no
Abriata.
transmisibles del Ministerio de Salud de
She
Argentina.
is from the
Graciela,
Ministry of
dejo
Health
la
from
palabra.
Argentina. Graciela, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I apologize for the lighting. I really enjoyed the presentations. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity, for the invitation to be here. We all know how important this agenda is. And obviously, when we address these issues, they are extremely complex. And different ministries and different sectors should work together, not only the government, but also the community and the industry. With regard to the politics or the policies, it's important that we have an interministerial approach. It certainly takes an articulation between the different ministries and different sectors. On the other hand, we have the role that is played by the community with regard also to supply and demand. And it's important that we also discuss healthy and sustainable foods. In 2021, a resolution was approved by the Ministry of Health of Argentina. And having healthy foods as one strategy, and also to have a sustainable production foods. Obviously, we need to address the water issue, and that's important so that we can be sustainable in 2030. For example, to produce 1 kilogram of legumes, it takes 12,000 of liters of water, and we need to consider the amount of water that is necessary for you to raise cattle, for example. So this agro-industrial model certainly requires funding, but we have already started addressing this. So from the ministry standpoint, also by articulating with the civil society as well with the industry and also with our Ministry of Production and Development. We know that we had a plan in 2018 that addressed transgenic or GMO foods. So there is also the cultural aspect on how people select or choose healthy foods. And we know that this is also an issue for the most vulnerable population and also low-income families, as well as low level of education. That means that there is a lot to be done. We are also working in education. We recently had the approval of a legislation on healthy nutrition. It's important that we work with the Ministry of Education, that we educate people on food and nutrition. There's also a requirement that involves education teachers. We need to raise their awareness, not only with teachers, but also with students and the community in general. And as I mentioned, it's important that we promote a healthy environment, and we are addressing that at all education levels so that we can promote this cultural shift towards this food system that is both sustainable and healthy. We are also addressing social development. We are working with community leaders and schools in order also to leverage also family-based agriculture. We also need to work with small and mid-sized companies so that that is also prioritized when they are purchasing foods. So regional economies should also be prioritized. Obviously, this is not an easy task. There are many actors involved. There are the different urgencies and needs. But I think that with the support of civil organizations and also with the involvement of public institutions, government organizations, we will be able to address this issue of healthy and sustainable foods. This type of research certainly helps to put this agenda on the focus of our discussions, being the focus of our discussions, and also to discuss which path we should follow. So I'd like to commend all researchers. Congratulations on your research, and once again, thank you very much. I believe that this is certainly a need or very necessary for our countries. The issue of obesity has already been mentioned, and it certainly represents a risk for health, and it can trigger non-communicable diseases. And that happens also because of the lack of nutrients. We have a group of people who are chronically undernourished with a deficit of nutrients and who cannot afford the healthy foods. And unfortunately, we still have a large population that
Gracias, Graciela.
experiences
Bueno, vamos a seguir
this
ahora con el
challenge.
segundo
Thank
orador, que
you,
es Greg Hallen,
Graciela. Now
especialista
let's move to
senior del
Greg
programa sobre
Hallen.
sistemas
He is a
alimentarios
senior
resistentes al
specialist
clima del Centro
from the
Internacional de Investigaciones
International
para el Desarrollo de
Development
Canadá.
Research
Greg,
Center
la
from
palabra es tuya.
Canada. Greg, I'd like to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Maria. Are you hearing me okay?
Fine.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to speak in English, and thank you for the opportunity to do so. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you all today and to be part of this initiative and the vision that's being set by it. And it's been great listening to the other presenters, and thank you to the translators who've helped me follow them all. I'm with Canada's International Development Research Centre, as was presented, and I'm with a new program of work around climate resilient food systems. We're really interested in all of this because our focus is on pursuing healthier, sustainable and more resilient food systems under the circumstances of climate change. We've been working with the Wellcome Trust for some time, I'm here with Maureen Watsama, who's going to speak after me. And we take a lot of pleasure and pride in being part of the work that's been going on over this past year. IDRC also works with other funders like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, and we've been cooperating with Bloomberg Philanthropies a lot, particularly in the Latin American region, in pursuing these objectives of healthier food systems, particularly. But as development and research funders, our strategies, our funding strategies, they evolve over time. And I think this project of the past year, this Agenda for Action project, really reflects those evolving strategies and the fact that we are, as we try to respond to new global challenges, our work of the past that has really emphasized the public health objectives of food systems change is now really continuing to that, but also trying to pursue the co-benefits to public health and the environment and respond to the climate change challenge. And I'd really like to emphasize too that the work of the three teams from Brazil, Argentina and Chile is building upon successful work that they've been doing over many years, and particularly the past 10 years that I've been observing it and I've had the privilege to be part of. Work that where these teams and many others, and particularly we'll talk about the Colansa, the bigger Colansa network soon, where they have been forging new ground. They've been quite innovative in how they've developed networks, worked collaboratively across countries. They've connected academia and advocacy and government to really pursue a number of policy wins that countries of Latin America have advanced and that the rest of the world can learn from. They've been the attributes of the work of the past 10 years. Now this work around this past year's work on the Agenda for Action project has also really pursued to build bridges between the public health community and the communities who are focused on climate change, environmental sustainability, and sustainable agriculture. And I think that has been the characteristic feature that our previous speakers, Danielle, Guillermo, and Giannini have spoken about. The fact that this is the challenge of the future, of bringing these communities together so that we can pursue those co-benefits. And I really applaud the teams for the progress that's being made on that. I think the presenters have spoken about the challenges, the gaps in the evidence base, the lack of coherence between the different sectors, the different specialist groups who focus on whether it's public health or on agriculture or on climate change and environmental concerns. Daniel, Guillermo, Giannini have all spoken to this. And the lack of interdisciplinary action, the lack of multi-sectoral action. But I actually would like to highlight that you've actually made some breakthroughs this year, not in just the work on literature that you've done to expose that which has been done and the gaps in it, but some significant progress has been made in the conversations between these different epistemic groups. I think that's a highlight of the past year, and particularly Guillermo spoke to this when he was talking about the Senate, the working tables of the Senate committee for the challenges of the future science, technology, and innovation. This was in Chile, but I think we can also talk about progress that's been made in Argentina and Brazil in bringing those creating those bridges between the different groups, so that important conversations can be had about addressing the gaps in the evidence and addressing the gaps in action. I think that's been a really great development of this past year, and I know you feel like there's so much more work to be done, but the work has started. And this has all happened at the same time over the past year while the UN Food Systems Summit was going on. And I know that quite a number of Latin American countries were not fully engaged, either for a variety of reasons, were not fully engaged in the UN Food Systems Summit process. And yet, many of these dialogues that the summit was trying to promote were occurring, particularly in Chile, but also Brazil and Argentina, that all helped to forge progress on toward co-benefits to health and the environment. So I'd like to applaud you for all of that work. I know there's a lot more to be done. I think the important work that you've done also in understanding the political context in each of the countries is really helping lay the groundwork for identifying the priorities and best opportunities for actually moving ahead with important actions. So congratulations to the teams. Thank you to Modi and Wellcome for working with us on this. And I really look forward to learning more about what the way forward is, not just in these three countries, but for the region as a whole, and to helping your region amplify your voice so that the rest of the world can learn from this progress, as the rest of the world has been learning from the progress on the policy wins that have been made in each of these countries. And before I finish, and because I may not have another opportunity, I want to say a big congratulations to Colansa as well. I know that we'll be talking more about Colansa in a little while, but that community of practice is exemplary, I think, in terms of how we need to work to bring the public health, environment, climate change, and agriculture communities and the finance and economics experts together to advance this important agenda. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. Bueno, vamos a seguir ahora con la última oradora de esta sesión,
Great.
que es Modi.
Now we have last speaker
Max
of
Sama,
our session,
que es directora de
Modi
Intervenciones,
Maxenza,
Clima y Salud de Wellcome Trust.
Director of Wellcome Trust.
Modi, perdón.
Modi, please.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me, and it's just really fantastic to be here at this launch event. So I'm Modi Maxenza. I'm not actually the director of the Wellcome Trust. I'm the head of interventions in the climate and health team. So yeah, that's my boss's boss. So I'm not sure he'd want me to say I've taken his post. But yeah, I'm really delighted to be here today. It's been a pleasure listening to the progress, the amazing progress, as Greg was saying, that the teams have made in in pulling together this impressive body of work on the healthy, sustainable food systems transition that's needed, both for the sake of our health and the planet. For those of you who don't know Wellcome, we're a philanthropic foundation. We're based in London, in the UK, and basically we fund science to solve the world's urgent challenges. Over the next 10 years, we're planning to invest £16 billion on solving particularly 3 global challenges: climate change and health, mental health, and infectious diseases. And all this will be underpinned by funding discovery research to better understand how we can improve people's health in different parts of the world. So we supported this project, as Greg was saying, as an early pilot investment for Wellcome Trust in this climate change and health area. And we supported it because, for several reasons. Firstly, Latin America has been leading the world in terms of healthy feed policies. As Greg was saying, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, obesity, non-communicable diseases were recognized as a global priority that all countries needed to solve, including countries in Latin America, but no one was really doing very much to address them. And the countries that have been involved, the partners that have been involved in this project, really have been leading the way in getting some significant healthy food policies, such as junk food marketing restrictions, better, clearer labels, and junk food taxes adopted in the region. And so I think partners in Latin America are very well placed to lead the world on this new problem that we're now facing of sustainable food systems and health. It's not necessarily a new problem, but it's one whose prominence is now being recognized fully at the global level. And as we've heard, food systems both contribute to climate change through unsustainable production methods, which destroy ecosystems, and unsustainable livestock farming, which contributes to greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. But also the agri-food system sector is going to be the most affected by climate change. And the burden of ill health linked to climate change is going to be greatest for those diseases that are related to what we eat and the diets. And this will be especially true for the Latin American and Caribbean region, where a lot of food that is consumed in the world is produced. And also there are already high levels of diet-related diseases, the double burden of malnutrition, as we've been hearing. And so what I've heard from the 3 presentations on progress that's been achieved, the impressive progress that's been achieved through this very rapid 1-year project, is first of all that the healthy and sustainable food systems agenda is not yet seen as a priority, like where we were with obesity and non-communicable diseases 10 years ago. Actors in the food system are currently fragmented and disjointed. Those working on health have not connected with those working on environmental sustainability, those working on production and not connected to those from production, for example, from working in consumption, for example. And I'm really pleased that this project has enabled a variety of diverse actors from diverse sectors to come together to start to look at these challenges and the opportunities around a transition towards a healthy and sustainable food system in the region. The agenda for action that has been produced by Idec outlines the pathways for transforming the food system to become both healthy and sustainable through the way food is produced, distributed, offered, and consumed. And the Colansa network and many others who have been involved in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile are now ready to collaborate together. And I'm really looking forward to see how the seeds that have been sown through bringing together actors to really look at the scale of the problem and start to think about what the solutions might be in Latin America can actually continue to develop this ambitious project and see it lead to ambitious policies and action on sustainable and healthy food systems in Latin America. So you guys are already world leaders in the healthy food agenda. I'm really looking forward to seeing how you collaborate and show that similar global leadership on sustainable food systems in the future. And I hope we can be part of the ecosystem that helps you get there and help to share the learnings from what's happening in this region with other parts of the world. So thanks very much and congratulations everyone for this massive achievement.
Thank you, Modi. Bueno, ahora vamos a hacer un breve intercambio entre unas preguntas que
Now we are
nos
going to
llegaron.
have
Voy a
a
leer la
brief
primera,
Q&A
no tiene
session. I'm going to
destinatario,
read the
pero
first
me
one.
parece que
It's
la
an
persona
open-ended
indicada para responder
question,
esta primera
and I
pregunta
think
es
that
Janine.
probably Janine would be the right
Y
person to
es
answer it.
con respecto a la definición de
The
sustentabilidad,
definition
si
of
esta definición está
sustainability.
regulada
It
y si no,
is
qué
a
parámetros deberían
regulated
usarse para
definition, and
definir
if not, what are the
sustentabilidad en el
parameters
sistema
that we can
alimentario. Por
use
supuesto, si
to
alguno de los otros
consider
dos
a
ponentes
sustainable
quisiera agregar algo,
food
pero me parece
system? So maybe
que la persona
Janine
en este
and then
momento
the
primero
others
para
can
responderla sería
join
Janine.
in and add anything. Thank you, Soledad. I am going to start, and then Guillermo and Jamie can just, and Daniel can just join in. Well, there are two sides of it. Our program at IDEC, it's called Healthy, Sustainable Food Program or Food System Program. This title of the program takes into consideration eating habits, but correlated with the environment, showing the interrelation between food production, food consumption, and climate change. The project and all the actions related to the project and the call for action are all within the same perspective. The way we produce, commercialize, supply, and consume food items and the relationship they have with the environment. I really don't know whether it has been regulated or not, but 2 months ago, I participated in a PhD thesis dissertation, and it addressed the qualification of the concept of sustainability. And what I've learned from this academic exercise is that there are a number of concepts from different lenses. And the need, maybe it's not standardization, so to speak, but rather qualification of the term. I don't think it has been clearly stated yet what are the parameters, what are the criteria, but I think that science, in view of needs, science is really trying to build the required knowledge to define it. Let's see if Daniel or Guillermo would like to add anything.
Daniel, Guillermo?
I would like to add, and I don't think there is a formal definition, at least not that I'm aware of, but the concept of sustainability is closely related with something year over year. So the idea that we can do it today and we can do it in future generations. So this intergenerational concept. For me, sustainability is something that refers to the possibility that future generations will have the same abilities or capabilities that we have today to produce exactly as we do today. Well, natural resources, for example, if they are lost or wasted or degraded, future generations won't have the same opportunities as we have today of using natural resources. This is the way that I see it.
Muchas
so
gracias. Ahora hay una pregunta que es para que
Now, there
respondan
is
los
one
tres,
more
por favor.
question, and I would
Y es,
like to ask the three of you to address it.
¿cómo son los retos para promover los sistemas alimentarios en
What are the
Brasil,
challenges
Argentina y
to
Chile
have
si se
Brazilian,
relacionan, si
Chilean,
encuentran puntos en
and
común,
Argentinian food
bueno, eso,
systems
de la
in
manera más
place.
sintética
And
posible, porque es
what
una pregunta que
are
puede tener un montón
the
de
points in common and the
despliegue, bueno, los invito a
differences
responder.
of the different systems and programs? But please be brief, right? I'm going to go first. And I'd like to add something to what was said before. Sustainability also concerns institutional sustainability. How can we have really the organizations that are sound enough to provide their continuity and the same practices in the future? I think it's an add element to the concept of sustainability. But we have a very volatile region here, so that's important to have it in mind. Concerning the global agenda and our different cooperation possibilities, in our project, we have realized that there are specificities of all of countries, but also a lot of commonalities that we can work on together. Since last year, with all these opportunities of discussions that we have had about the environment, climate change, and nutritional quality, we have really, we've been trying to include these topics in the agenda of the region as a whole, and I think we've succeeded in doing it. In addition, a very important point is collective construction. We are not only proposing a methodology to investigate each country, but we are also working on political issues and regional experiences can just serve as input to the others. What's happening in Mexico, Chile, Argentina, and other countries. I think that all regional discussions can also serve as food for thought for the other countries. Another point that we see as commonality in our countries is the fragmentation of the initiatives of all different ministries and public departments, and the lack of communication with the private initiative. So I think that we can all act as a facilitator of that trust building, really encouraging the dialogue, the really build of trust among all different players, bringing together the private, the public sector, really serving as a facilitator among all the different players. Thank you very much.
¿Quién querría continuar?
I'd like to go next. I don't have much more to add. I think that Guillermo already gave us a very good summary. But I'd say that in general, the scientific communities in these three countries, that we work in a very similar way. We see the same kind of issues. I'd say that we follow this, we usually work same way, considering also the strengths and the weaknesses that we find also in the academia of these three countries. They are also very similar. I think that this is another point in common. And as for the challenges that we face as a community, as a member of the academia, I'd say that they are also very similar between the three countries. There is a high sensitivity regarding this issue. There is this wish to participate. And
yo apuntaría los cañones, el esfuerzo
I'd
a justamente
also say that it's important that we now organize this critical mass that we have in the three countries as well.
Muchas gracias. Janine, ¿algo
Thank
que
you.
querías agregar?
Janine? Yes. Yes, Soledad, I'll try to be very brief. I believe that what strongly brings us together is the way we produce and also how major transnational companies are present in the different countries. Not only on these three countries where the project was carried out, but also across the area. So big agro, big food companies. This is another point in common in the countries in this region. Daniel, or actually Guillermo, talked a little bit about how scientific communities work in a similar way. I would say that beyond the scientific communities, for example, today we are celebrating Colansa's first anniversary, which is a collaboration addressing this issue. So I'd like to invite you all to continue with this discussion. The project is over, but not this discussion. We'll have the opportunity to listen to testimonials of Colansa members, and I hope we have the opportunity to carry on with this work together. And finally, I'd like to say that Brazil right now is undergoing a terrible moment in which we see public policies being really putting an end to many of these policies. Today, we still have some legislations that are still available, and our constitution also sets the right to nutrition. And this is something that we will still keep on fighting for. We expect to restructure the governance framework that turned into a political issue, and also to address climate change. Thank you very
Bueno,
much.
muchísimas gracias.
Well,
Gracias
thank
a
you
todos por
very
participar.
much.
Fue muy
I'd like
interesante
to thank you all
escucharlos.
for joining us.
Y nos
It was a
deja
very interesting
exactamente en donde
session.
vamos a pasar
And
ahora,
now
que es a
we will
pensar a América
move
Latina desde
to
una
the
perspectiva
second
de
panel.
desafíos
So
globales. Esa va a
Latin
ser
America
nuestra
from the
próxima
perspective
mesa.
of global
Y
challenges.
ahí la primera
This is the
panelista
second
va a estar
panel.
a través de
Our
un
first
video. Es
speaker
Elisabetta
has
Resini, que es
pre-recorded
profesora
her
y coordinadora del
presentation.
Observatorio de
Elizabeth
Políticas
Resini,
Públicas
she
de
is a
Seguridad
professor
Alimentaria y Nutricional
at
de la
the
Universidad de
University of
Brasilia.
Brasilia.
Bueno, dejó un video de unos 10 minutos que
So
les pido
she
por
has a
favor que
10-minute
pongan así todos podemos
pre-recorded
escuchar.
video. So I'd
Muchas
like to
gracias.
ask our technicians to please have her video. Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to take part in this panel to discuss the results of the projects conducted in the three countries. I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity of taking part of the entire process here in Brazil. I'd like to highlight the commitment and the high quality of the work carried out by Idec's team. They really embraced this project. They understood that this could contribute for moving ahead with such important discussion in Brazil. It's a very important, urgent, and necessary discussion that we should have here in Brazil. But going beyond to these most objective outcomes from this project, there were some additional gains. One of them that I think that's important to stress is the opportunity to have expanded the dialogue with the academia, different universities that were already discussing food and nutrition agenda. But now we had the opportunity to focus on food systems and the urgency of addressing their sustainability. Another gain was to contribute for articulating the dialogue between different civil society organizations that address the environment in which food safety and security is also becoming more important. But in the past, we did not necessarily have a dialogue bringing together different stakeholders. We all know how complex this is. There is a language issue, different standpoints, different proposals, but it's important that we also have this kind of articulation. And I think that this project has also contributed for putting all this together. Before I talk to you about the agenda, I'd like to also say that right now in Brazil, anything that considers the short, mid, and long-term future needs to address the challenges that we are facing right now. More than 50% of the Brazilian population, they are now facing food insecurity that is translated by all the changes that took place, all the measures that were in place to support these families and that are no longer there. A country in which we have more than 50% of its population facing food insecurity is a country that is facing challenges in all different areas. So regarding development, social justice, so it's impossible to consider any agenda for Brazil without taking into account all these other dimensions. That happened because many of the policies were really not followed, and what we found is that happened mainly over the last 2 years. It's also a process also to destroy previous narratives on how we could actually present solutions to hunger, how do these food supply and food security stand here in Brazil. But we have 5 major dimensions. Obviously, they talk to each other. And I think that one of them goes across the other 4. So, for example, business, supply and demand, environment, health, and governance. So what are the challenges? This has already been addressed somehow, but I like just to emphasize some that I find very important. From the business and the economy standpoint or trade, today we have a consensus in Brazil that emerged out of concrete and subjective factors on how we produce our food. It's actually a paradigm of the agribusiness, but this is the only feasible means, be it from the economical standpoint, but also considering that we need to feed not only the Brazilian population, but the world population. Although our food insecurity rate does not prove that, this was the narrative that was developed. Over the years, these groups, they really hold very strong political and economic power. Thus, they have impact on decisions related to how public funding is earmarked and also on how public policies are established. So we have the challenge of reorganizing information to the Brazilian society and also to educate so that people understand that it's possible to reorganize all the food system so that we can also move away from a matrix that depends on agrochemicals and on oil, a matrix that certainly also has a strong negative impact on the environment, on our society, on our economy. As for supply and demand, over the last decades, Brazil or the Brazilian government stopped or gave up on organizing the basic food supply systems. Today, Brazil does have a national domestic supply that is very weakened. We do not work with inventories that would allow us to manage the food purchase and the supply and demand of foods. We'd say that almost everything lies on the hands of the private sectors. And we know that they will open new stores where they want to. So we lack a national supply policy in order to ensure that at any municipality we would give access to our population to healthy foods. As for the environment, unfortunately, Brazil is on the news worldwide, and we know how this government is really not being in compliance with our regulation. That produces also a high level of violence. We have many groups invading the indigenous people's areas. Thus, it's urgent that we also reorganize access to land in Brazil. We need a land reform so that we can promote family-based agriculture. In the health dimension, we still face a huge challenge in order to have nutrition prioritized. This also translates into job offer type of healthcare provided, mainly primary healthcare, so that also diet and nutrition can contribute for preventing disease, for promoting health, and the structural challenge of having the approval of regulations. Most of them depend on the Congress, on the Brazilian Congress, regarding, for example, the taxation of sugary drinks, on advertisement, on how we can also control the market of unhealthy foods at schools, for example. But unfortunately, our Congress does not take that as a priority. Not to mention legal discussions about the legitimacy of our regulatory agency to really implement measures for fighting that. For example, for food labeling, despite the evidence, we still do not have the best legislation possible. And that happened because of the pressure of regulated industries. But to me, what is really key is governance. So who makes the decisions? How are the decision processes like? And what is the core of this dimension? So what we find is that nutrition is not considered a common good nor a human right, when that is not a part of this discussion, what we find is that private interests prevail. So with that, what we see is this interruption of any dialogue with the public society in order to determine public policies. We also had a decrease in public funding for very important programs. And this is also what we see globally. Obviously, there is this relationship between what happens globally and what happens domestically. I'd like also to point out that we need to consider also the Summit of Food Systems that happened in September of 2021. That summit suffered criticism regarding the definition of its coordination, of the same coordinators, on what could really promote the necessary changes in food systems, what sustainability is. And as for governance, the summit proposed a platform of having multiple interested stakeholders. The criticism to this type of governance is based on how this type of proposal takes this responsibility out of governments in mediating public interests, in maintaining, in our case, nutrition as a common good, and also considering what sustainability means when we think about the food systems. What we found is that sustainability was viewed as only as a math calculation and how we could reduce our carbon footprint. But it's important that we consider also the participation of groups that have been already excluded and that suffer the most. In that sense, it's worth mentioning that our region, Latin America, and many other countries, that we have very rich experiences that certainly determine means to move ahead in fighting these challenges that actually increased after 2 years of this pandemic and the different consequences that our countries suffered.
It's important to emphasize that the civil society of the region and the academia, they have concrete proposals, they studied results, generated experiences that have to be expanded, that have to go beyond the territory of examples and start really taking the center stage of public policies. In Brazil, we are right now experiencing a situation in which we have very important decisions to make to deal with the present and also to open the doors for short, mid, and long-term changes in the future. It requires an active commitment, constant action of researchers and civil society so that the conditions, the appropriate conditions for transformation can really be created. Thank you all
Muchísimas
very
gracias,
much.
profesora Elizabeta.
Thank
Bueno,
you,
vamos a seguir
Professor
ahora
Elizabeth.
con Maya Takagi,
Now I'm
que es
going to
líder
give the
del
floor to
Programa
Maya
Regional de la
Takari,
Organización de las
who
Naciones
is
Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, de
who is a
FAO.
member
Maya,
of the
muchas
Food and
gracias. Está
Agriculture
por ahí, la
Organization of
palabra
the
es
United
suya.
Nations, FAO. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm going to share our opinion as a UN organization. Just a second.
Pantalla con ustedes. ¿Logran mirar?
Sí, perfectamente, gracias.
Can you all see it? Great. I'm going to address exactly what you've been saying, how to transform food systems in our region of Latin America and the Caribbean. Many of the challenges that have been mentioned are common to the region. And we have to put them all on the same page. Next week, we are going to have the regional meeting of FAO, bringing all the countries of the region to discuss this topic. And this is exactly why this presentation also pictures what we are going to propose in this very important meeting. And this is why this webinar today is just so timely for me. How can we understand the current context? COVID-19 pandemic still on with a number of economic consequences, which are going to make us lag behind many, many years. And as a consequence, it will be even more difficult to achieve all development goals by 2030, sustainable development objectives. We know that there has been an economic recovery, but still not satisfactory. There are also the challenges of hunger, poverty, and also food insecurity. We still have some uneven distribution of income here. This region has traditionally been a region with major social inequalities, which had been enhanced by the pandemic. And finally, it's all correlated with the climate change crisis. It's a result of degradation of ecosystems, of natural resources, climate crisis, and it increases the frequency and intensity of disasters and crises. Concerning nutrition and food insecurity, here we can see some charts by FAO, very gloom numbers, because we can see since 2014, we had seen more and more food insecurity from moderate or severe levels to even severe levels, with a total of 654 million people, but in 2020 we've reached numbers, record numbers really. The African region is where we have the highest percentage of population under food insecurity, but it's also interesting to observe there had been an increase in food insecurity in the region of the Americas. There are different ways of measuring them, and all the indicators show exactly the same. Here we have people in situations of emergency because of conflicts, hurricanes, earthquakes, and there are 5 countries in the region under such a situation of emergency, which are also subject to humanitarian support. In addition to that, we have the crisis of overweight and obesity. And this year, we are expecting to update the numbers. We don't have numbers of obesity from since 2016, but we are going to have that updated this year with our sister agencies. As we had said, in addition to that, we have ethnic and territory gaps in terms of malnourishment. So indigenous populations, African descendants, all of them affected by malnourishment, but also overweight and obesity, all of that enhanced by the pandemic. Especially because of the Ukrainian war, and before that, we used to see an increase in the so-called cost of healthy diets. African and Latin America were the only two regions that have had a cost increase. 1 in every 5 people in those two regions do not have enough income to have healthy diet. And here we have the inflation pressure, which also impacts feeding. So here we have the impact of the pandemic, and that's going to increase further because of the war, the Ukraine-Russia war. And we expect to see an impact on the numbers of food insecurity in the world, especially in the region in war. We've heard from our teams in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and others. Most countries have had legislations or some other kind of regulations in favor of healthy food systems, eating whole grains, green leaf and vegetables and fruit, promoting better food items at school, promoting local markets and local growers. So these are some of the answers that the region has already given to its own challenges. We know that despite that, all our environments are still being degraded. Our ecosystems are really impacted all the time, and we really have to try to focus on more sustainable food systems. I'm going to try to be brief because of time, but considering the agenda that we are going to bring to the knowledge of governments next week, we have focused on 4 key areas, and one of them for the region is to contribute to creating sustainable food systems. And here we have the 4 key pillars: contribute and reverse hunger and food insecurity, ensure physical and economic access to safe, nutritional foods, support policies and programs to reduce overweight, obesity, and non-transmissible disease, and really promoting the agribusiness so that we can have a better development of the system. So this is one of the initiatives. There is a second one, which is to promote prosperous, inclusive rural societies, protecting the rural livelihood habits and increasing productivity of the local growers and others, and also promote sustainable agriculture with the necessary adaptation, resilience, adapting to the weather, dealing with the biodiversity, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions from agribusiness activities. It's important to emphasize that the summit on food systems, as mentioned before, was really important. The summit comprised 23 countries providing interventions, so 23 out of 33, and 14 presented some national alternatives. And FAO is willing to support implementation of all these route or policies, of supporting them even financially, so that they can improve their national initiatives and join the task force with all the international organizations. Considering all these initiatives, 8 of the countries have submitted a request to be supported by us. Here we have the participation, quite variable. We can see here there were some vice presidents, some ministries. So we've got to the top management of the countries, but we really wondered what's going to get out of it. It was an opportunity for bringing this topic to the top levels of managerial institutions, really making the governments aware of the importance of promoting changes. Here we have a single mapping about the topics that were observed. So family agriculture, food safety, so food security, sustainable risk management, resilience, a number of topics which are all related with that, and bringing together very important elements that have been mentioned before this afternoon, which are all essential for the transformation of the system. So that was my presentation. Thank you all very much for your attention. And congratulations to the work and for the Colansa's anniversary.
Bueno, vamos a seguir ahora con
Thank you,
Cristina
Maya. So
Romanelli,
now,
que es
Cristina
oficial del Programa
Romanelli,
de Biodiversidad, Cambio
who
Climático y
is from the
Salud de la Organización
biodiversity
Mundial de la Salud.
with
Cristina,
the
por ahí,
WHO.
la palabra
Christina,
es tuya.
are you
Muchas
there?
gracias.
So you have the floor. Thank you, Christina.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted to join you all in this really rich dialogue from the WHO Department of Environment, Climate and Health at WHO headquarters in Geneva, where I'm actually currently attending the Geneva biodiversity meetings in, which are actually vitally important and relevant to the discussions that we're having here today. And of course, to the outcomes of the forthcoming COP15. So thank you so much for the invitation. It's a tall order to follow the compelling presentations that have preceded. And because I'm at these conferences, I don't have a beautiful PowerPoint presentation to show you. But I do have some messages that I want to underline. So thankfully, the urgency of addressing the interconnected issues of food system transformation, of biodiversity and climate and health also speaks for itself. There are, as we've seen from the many other speakers that preceded, so many interlinked layers and challenges, and the need to really build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic has really brought these challenges to the forefront globally, and really shown us how closely our persistent ecological and climate crises are interconnected with food systems and malnutrition in all its forms. So while I can't address the full breadth of challenges and opportunities in this short statement, I would like to take the time to really emphasize this urgency and the urgent need for transformation of our dysfunctional food system at a global level, with an emphasis on how closely interwoven biodiversity and climate crises in particular are with the health challenges that we face. So we've talked a lot about evidence in previous presentations, but I think it really needs to be underlined that over the past 5 years in particular, we've seen an unprecedented number of global reports that have put biodiversity loss, climate change, and food systems and healthy, sustainable diets really at the center stage. You know, just to name a few, we have the first global assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services, which was released by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform of the IDRC, the IPCC reports on land and climate, its latest report on climate and ecosystems, the various FAO reports, including those that have been published jointly with the WHO, the Eat Lancet Commission report, the recent WHO report on the health argument for climate action, and many others, which have really been met with an upsurge of initiatives and coalitions, including novel partnerships for to support sustainable and healthy diets in the lead up to and following the UN Food Systems Summit last year and many other initiatives. So I think that together, all of these have shown time and time and time again that the way we produce, distribute, and consume food is having really an unprecedented impact on biodiversity, on climate, with associated global burdens of malnutrition in all its forms, which are on the rise, as our FAO colleague has also shown us. So amongst this grouping of scientific findings, last year, WHO also produced new guidance to support mainstreaming of biodiversity for nutrition and health across different sectors, which I will use here as an example and basis for discussion to complement some of the presentations of other speakers. And I think that the starting point is this, that to understand the urgency of the nature and climate crises and how they underpin food systems, we really also have to understand the scale of the damage and pressures our activities have within the global food system have on our natural world. To name only a few examples, 3/4 of ecosystems have been transformed and over 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions, actually up to 37% if we also account for pre and post food production, are largely the result of human practices to produce food, feed, fiber, and fuel for people and livestock. Almost 3/4 of global freshwater withdrawals are used for agriculture, and about 90% of fish stocks are already harvested at maximally sustainable levels. Over 1/3 of the land's surface is used for crop and livestock production. Almost 80% of global ocean and freshwater eutrophication is caused by agriculture. And we haven't even begun to discuss the impacts of land use change and deforestation. It's a really long list, but I did tell you I wanted to emphasize the urgency. And I think that these examples really show us how deeply embedded these crises are. So these combined practices of unsustainable agricultural intensification, the homogenization of our crop and livestock production, agricultural inputs, and pesticides not only have a severe impact on our ecosystems, they also come with a really hefty price tag to our economies, to our health, to our well-being. As an example of the economic impacts alone, the loss of pollinators alone. We're not often thinking about these things when we're talking about food systems, but the loss of pollinators alone, thanks to the use of herbicides, pesticides, and other agricultural practices, accounts for up to $577 billion every single year. So something to think about. And land degradation alone has been found to have a negative impact on the well-being of 3.2 billion people, with a price tag of over 10% of the global GDP. So beyond economies and beyond livelihoods, the human health impact is no less alarming. Diet-related deaths accounted for an estimated 11 million premature adult deaths in 2017, and that was before the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic itself has had a really devastating effect on both the economy and malnutrition rates in Latin America and the Caribbean in particular, with a really, truly devastating increase in hunger in the region, as the FAO colleague has shown us, totaling over 30% increase between 2019 and 2020. Let's let that sink in, a 30% increase in 1 year alone. And we are now in 2022 and still have not quantified how that has changed. There's also been a 9% growth in moderate to severe food insecurity over that period, which was the highest in the world in any region. And a large part of that is attributable to prevalent inequities in the system, stagnant economic growth, and the very high cost of healthy diets, as has been pointed out before. So over time, even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, but over time, a new nutritional reality has been emerging, which was clearly exacerbated by the pandemic, but one that was already developing, one in which undernutrition, so wasting, stunting, and micronutrient deficiencies, and overnutrition, overweight, obesity, and diet-related non-communicable diseases can coexist within the same populations, households, and even sometimes within the same individual. So importantly, this triple burden of malnutrition affects every single region worldwide, but it's most significant in low and middle income countries, where more than a third of these already had overlapping forms of malnutrition prior to COVID-19. It's also important to consider that the more vulnerable populations, including the poor, smallholder farmers and fishers, indigenous people, women, and children, are often most reliant on natural resources, the natural resources that essentially we're all unabashedly destroying, but they're also the least protected by social protection mechanisms, and where you will also often find weaker health systems able to respond to these growing burdens of disease. So equally important is the realization that our food production and consumption patterns not only affect nutritional outcomes, but a whole range of other negative health outcomes, including antimicrobial resistance, threats to food safety, infectious disease emergence, and they can also come to exacerbate comorbidities or other health burdens among populations that are already ill and vulnerable. So in a nutshell, the unabated loss of biodiversity in the global food system at each the genetic, species, and ecosystem levels, combined with the growing threat of a changing climate, poses a substantial and increasing threat to the availability of and access to healthy, safe, and nutritious diets. And taken together with the political, regulatory, socio-cultural, behavioral, economic, commercial, and other determinants of health, many of which have been addressed throughout the courses of the various presentations, throughout the whole of the food chain, we're essentially creating a perfect storm, particularly among vulnerable and marginalized people at the individual, household, and population levels, which in turn can exacerbate all these forms of malnutrition. So it's this vicious circle and cycle that we are creating and perpetuating. So while the I did say I wanted to emphasize the urgency, but it's not all doom and gloom. While the magnitude of the environmental, nutrition, and health challenges that we face as a result of this largely broken system is really worrying and alarming and significant, I think that there are also really significant opportunities to overcome them through more coordinated cross-sectoral actions in ways that actually effectively harness biodiversity and nutrition to achieve healthier, more sustainable diets. So how do we propose to do so? I know I don't have enough time to go through the whole range of them, but just to draw out a couple of examples, at WHO, we've worked consistently with partners, including FAO, UN Environment, CBD, OIE, and many others, to develop tools and guidance to address these common threats. And the guidance on mainstreaming biodiversity for nutrition and health is one of those numerous tools, and it presents a very clear framework with 6 pillars that show us how we can achieve healthier, more sustainable diets. And I'm happy to provide a link in the chat if anybody is interested in reading the publication. Also at COP26 last year, we presented the health argument for climate change, in which food system transformation is directly related to 2 of our 10 core arguments for climate action. So arguments are absolutely not lacking. And in addition to the reports and the various guidance that we produce, I really want to emphasize the added value of partnerships we're engaged with, both with various organizations, with several of you, but also with countries.
Sorry, Cristina, sorry to interrupt. We have just 2 more minutes, please. Thank you.
All right. So maybe let me just mention this one, and then we'll move into the discussion. So the Food System Summit last year led to a proposal of a coalition of the willing to promote healthy diets and sustainable food systems for children and for all, in which WHO and other UN partners, together with 16 frontrunner countries, including Brazil, have been working to maximize the added value of the Healthy Diet Coalition to transform the global food system and maximize progress towards zero hunger and malnutrition. So I think that there are very many entry points that we could be discussing. We don't have time to look at them all now, but I look forward to a lively discussion. Thanks.
No, muchísimas gracias. Nosotros ahora tenemos el plan de seguir con Lorena Alemandi, que es consultora del NCD Alliance, pero Lorena infelizmente tuvo un problema familiar y no va a poder acompañarnos, así que bueno, en otra oportunidad va a poder estar con nosotras. Fue un placer escucharlas y ahora vamos a pasar a la última parte de este evento, que es la celebración del primer año de Colansa, para la cual voy a invitar a Ana Paula Bortoleto, inviting Ana Paula Bortoleto. She is from the Brazilian Institute of Consumer Protection and also coordinator at Colansa. Ana Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Soledad. It's a great pleasure to be here. Today, I'll be able to speak Portuguese, not always that is something possible. It's not every day that we have the opportunity to have this multi-language meeting, and I think that this is one of the advantages of technology. Despite all challenges, despite the language barrier. Please allow me to share my screen. For this first anniversary, just a moment. I hope it works.
Esse é documento que eu não vou apresentá-lo todo, mas
this is a document, and I'm not going to go over the entire document, but it's a document that puts together all the activities carried out by Colansa over this first year.
Inicialmente eu queria apresentar primeiro, né, o que é a Colansa para aqueles que
Please allow me to share what Colansa is. It's a network of organizations, professionals, people who work for building healthy, sustainable, equitable, and food systems that can also be inclusive in order to promote nutrition and health for anyone in this region. The major goals of our organization is to promote meetings. We want to be a meeting space that allows us to exchange, to disseminate what's new, to discuss strategies that will ensure the development of these food systems, and also discuss public policies that will allow us to move forward regarding these food systems. And we're talking about public policies that are based on science, with no conflict of interest with organizations concerning their businesses. In order to be a Colansa member, you just need to agree with our manifest that's available at our website, and also to declare that you don't have any conflict of interest. If you are a consultant, for example, your practices or your product should not present a conflict of interest with what we are pursuing. So, for example, ultra-processed foods or agrochemicals, for example. We have built up experience over this first year. Some of them have already been discussed this afternoon. I apologize because I cannot change pages here.
Acho que eu vou fazer a exibição mais simples para.
I think I'll try to simplify so that at least you can see the document.
Agora sim?
I think that it's working now. Let me try. You may think it's just 1 year, but we have certainly carried out so many activities so that we can move forward with the public policies. In this report, we just highlight some examples. For example, one regarding food from North Carolina University. And you can see how many countries have evolved regarding the promotion of healthy diet, also nutrition at school, regulatory measures implemented in different countries. But we obviously face a major challenge ahead of us, and we expect Colansa to increase its footprint. Everything starts back in 2016, when a group of researchers and some civil society organizations got together in order to discuss, and that has been going on since then, in order to make sure that this would become an effective partnership. Today, there are 18 countries participating, more than 160 individuals and organizations. Many activities have already been described, and my colleagues have already addressed some of them. The report also shares the activities in numbers, the communication activities. We have a description of the actors, both as individuals and organizations. Here we have the picture of some of our members. And just in closing, I'd like to highlight our next steps. So there is a lot to be done, both regionally and internationally. This has already been discussed. When we discussed how we can ensure more sustainable and healthier foods. We understand that it's important that we discuss the interference of food industries in the decision-making process of public policies. Political decisions right now favor economic interests, and also to point out internal challenges, which is to really also improve and expand on our communication channels and to bring other stakeholders that address other dimensions, and also to have other Caribbean countries joining us. So we want to organize ourselves so that we can be connected to every single stakeholder in this region. I stop here. Thank you very, very much. And I hope that this is just the first of future celebrations. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ana Paula.
Thank
Bueno,
you
seguimos con
very,
Beatriz
very much,
Champagne,
Ana
que es de la
Paula.
Coalición de
So
América Latina
now
Saludable y del Comité Coordinador de
we will
Colansa.
also
Beatriz.
have Beatriz to talk about this first anniversary.
Adelante.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Un momento para poner mi exposición.
Thank you very much. 1 second and I'll be ready.
Discúlpeme, a lo mejor me tomo un momento más.
Just 1 second and I'll be ready to go.
Sí, parece que se me cerró cuando se me cerró la exposición anteriormente. Muy bien.
Well,
ante todo, quiero
I would
celebrar
like to start by celebrating with all of you this first year of Colansa. It's been a multi-year effort, at least for 3 years, as Ana Paula pointed out, even more than that. And I would like to thank Robert, Greg, for the support that they have given us and the provide of organizing Colansa. And I would like to thank Idec, which has been the leader of this coordinating committee that has taken us to this final organization. I would like to start by saying that there is one of the key characteristics in our region, which is really what provides that success that you've all mentioned. Our region has really evolved in the areas of nutrition and smoking-free area. And why is that? Because in our region, we have this high sense of solidarity, and we tend to be very generous. So it means we work quite well together, and we can help each other to promote our knowledge and also to deal with changes in policies and institutional changes in all our countries. This is the characteristic that has ensured Colansa to have such great breakthrough, because we have complementarity. I would like to say how CLASS, the Coalition for Health America, complements with the others, because there is something unique to offer at Colansa, which is its focus on political actions. CLAS, my organization, is an alliance that promotes health policies in non-transmissible diseases. It really encourages the exchange of experience in our region to really obtain political positioning. We support countries during political process, and we also represent the region in international instances. Latin America, and considering the task we have in hand, has already done a lot. We have been working as an integrated region for a while. And it's important to emphasize that last year, we created a regional agenda comprising a number of common aspects with what Colansa had as its mission. Emphasizing the correlation between investigation and political influence, which is exactly what Colansa does, the most important thing to me is that we have always really moved ahead, but I think Colansa can really bring together the academic part and political influence. There are a number of challenges, and I would like to emphasize two of them. First, the different aspects of investigation to public influence, and this is just one of its aspects. Here, and the purposes of academic the purpose of academic investigations are somewhat different. They are based on theory, they based on improving our understanding, but there are some aspects in political really influence that has a number of requirements. First, there are political changes in our country which really require us to move very fast and to change what we do in policies. Some academic studies, investigation studies necessarily do not have the same times of what we have in the area of politics. Usually, it involves other experts, and from a political aspect, we want really to bring the media and the different agencies to really become influencers in this area. Well, we wish everything would run as the evidence states, but there are a number of other things that interfere in what we do. And we have to participate, which is in something which is not exactly what the evidence states. And why is that? Well, corruption, conflicts of interest, interference of industry. Many of you are probably familiarized with that, but try really to set apart the things clearly so that we can have scientific evidence. This is the task that we have at hand. Sometimes we need to negotiate. In Guatemala, we've been working in the front of package label, and the proposed law has a clause that states that this is going to be a tax charged on products depending on the characteristics of the product. And we know that this clause is just going to end up killing a very good proposal. There are also changes in the government. Uruguay is an example. In Uruguay, they were working on a front of package label according to the rules of best practices, and a new government came into effect, and suddenly there we are fighting again for a front of package label, which is kind of okay, but does not necessarily meet the criteria that were initially desired. And another thing that is important to point out is that in many situations, there is a victim, so to speak, the person affected by a problem. Let's say if there is a school-age children that are not appropriately, the food provided to them is not good, it has a huge impact. The same if it's, let's say, a diabetic patient who has also been fed inappropriately diet. The victim, this case just speaks to our heart. It touches us emotionally. And then we simply put aside the science, the evidence, because there is an emotional appeal to it. Well, to close, I would like to say that Colansa, and the most important aspect of it is that we have to bring together investigation from one side, the world, the academia, to the world of political influence. And this is one of the most important things. We talk a lot about the importance of bringing together different communities. But these were communities, groups, which didn't use to move ahead hand in hand. So we need capacity building, exchange of opinions, communication, positioning, looking for joint spaces. So by doing that, we can bring together these communities. And I think this is the main achievement that Colansa has had in the recent year, and we still have got a lot to do. And from my organization, Classy LAS, we expected to get stronger and stronger. Thank you, Beatriz.
Bueno, vamos a seguir con Camila Corbalán del Instituto de Nutrición y Tecnología de Alimentos de Chile, INTA, y del Comité Coordinador de Colansa.
From Chile, from the Institute of Nutrition and Food Technology of Chile, INTAL. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome all of you. As Ana Paula and Beatriz has said, it is a celebration and we are just so happy to be here. What I'm going to share with you now, as soon as I can share the screen, is the work that we have done in the first year of Colansa, which is the work on the front of package label, and how we have decided to organize the work here. So these are networks, groups in which we make investigations, we can promote incidents and influence. And all of those that come from different worlds of nutrition, sustainability, politics, and others. So the mission of this group is to support, monitor, and guide the development of policies related with front of package label, considering the importance in our region and relying on the evidence available, free from conflict of interest, and favoring the articulation of different players in society. We have vision, objectives, actions, and I'm going to very briefly tell you what we have done in this 1 year of development. We've been working on systematizing the information we have in hand, making it publicly available. Our challenge for the upcoming year is to have information in the 3 languages, and we have generated an interactive map of evidence in which we can visualize the information about front of package label for warnings, but also for choices, general signaling, publicly available information to all of those who are part of our community. We've been working with the members of this group to generate evidence, and as Beatriz has said, we want to share information to decision makers, civil society, and not only in the academia. We are creating a repository of information tools, and as much as possible, we want to be able to use the same tools, the same instruments, so that we can start bringing together the information that we've been collecting. So it includes having different instruments involving the design of incidents and evaluation of the impact that it has involving labeling and economic or cost-effective analysis. So we really want a data repository. Let's say someone is interested in carrying out a study, he or she will refer to this repository. The idea is to develop projects in which we can make comparisons. So we want them to be based on available data. By doing that, we'll be able to compare the experience in our countries and maybe compare a country in which a policy had been implemented for a while compared to another one which hasn't started discussing it yet, or which is still in the initial steps of generating information. We want to gather evidence about the impact and also showing the decision makers of countries where things are not so developed, what are the discussions that we have had? What are potential opportunities that we have towards implementing more effective policies? We have been a part of some academic activities, some activities of the UN, and also some activities with decision makers, delivering information as much as possible. We have been working with CLAS under its guidance, and we have databases that provide mapping the main players in the region. Just to close, let me show you this first child, so to speak. We have nearly 600 members actively involved, and the future, we look forward to having even greater expansion We want to have more people on board so that we can keep on expanding the community of Colansa. So, happy celebration. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Camila. Bueno, vamos a
Thank
seguir
you,
ahora
Camila.
con Vilma Irasola, que
Vilma
es del Instituto
Irasola
de
now.
Efectividad Clínica y Sanitaria de
She is
Argentina y del
director of the
Comité
Institute
Coordinador de
of Clinical
Colansa.
Effectiveness and Health Policy of Argentina, and also a member of the Managing Committee of
No te
Colansa.
escuchamos, Vilma.
We cannot hear you yet, Vilma.
No.
Sorry, cannot hear her.
¿Ahora?
Ahora sí.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, muchas gracias para empezar.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by emphasizing our first year of celebration, and I apologize her, she's breaking up, her sound is not good at all. Let me thank the whole team, and it's really great that we got together for this initiative. I'm going to share my screen to share some of my thoughts about gender focus in the projects we are working on. In Colansa, we promote some actions and projects of political influence, and we also focus on gender differences. And there are different approaches of the topic. We talk about negative projects in gender, those that reinforce stereotypes and inequalities. Conversely, we called gender blind projects, those that do not reinforce stereotype, but are not aware of the problem. There are some gender respondent projects, and in this continuum, we get to specific projects for some projects related with gender, really coming to transformational policies. And once again, I apologize, her sound is really bad. We want to get very durable transformation, a transformation of roles, norms, and rules. These are projects that contemplate deep changes and promote strategies to lead to progressive, durable changes. And the strategies involve those affected people and incorporate roles and perspectives, really depending on knowledge.
Que pronto estará disponible de manera abierta para ayudarnos a evaluar.
Colansa will be made a tool available free of charge so that we can resume our research activities and also to influence policies regarding gender issues. And we expect to quite soon share this tool with all of you. And we hope that that supports us in assessing our project. Thank you very, very much for your attention. I try to be very brief, but I wanted to reassure you of our commitment towards the gender
Bueno,
issue
muchísimas
in our
gracias.
countries and
Celebro mucho
worldwide.
todas
Thank
las
you very
mujeres
much.
que fuimos en
Thank
este
you.
encuentro. Tuvimos nuestro All
I
Women
want
Panel,
also
que me
to
parece que es muy
celebrate all the
importante
women who
sostener
participated in
y
this project,
defender.
those who have
Y bueno, yo ahora me
participated
voy a
in this
despedir.
panel.
Les agradezco
It's very
muchísimo
important
haber
that we
escuchado
do that.
tantas
Right now,
disertaciones tan
I'd like to
interesantes.
bid
Me voy a
farewell.
despedir, no sin
Thank
antes
you very
dejarles
much.
con
I'm so
la
happy that we had
disertación
such
grabada
important
de 4
presentations. But
miembros
before
de
doing that,
Colansa, de diferentes
I'd
países,
like
que han
to
respondido a través de
share
distintos
now the
videos a la
testimonials
pregunta de cómo se
of
puede
4
contribuir,
Colansa
cómo puede
members.
Colansa
So they
contribuir a la
pre-recorded
transformación de los
videos
sistemas alimentarios.
telling us
Entonces
how
vamos a escuchar
Colansa
las
can help
respuestas
us in changing
de
food
Simón
systems.
Barquera de
So
México,
let's have
de Rachel Sánchez de
their
Uruguay, de Camila Maraña de
replies.
Brasil
So
y
we
de
have
Luciana
2
Castronuevo
colleagues
de
from
Argentina.
Mexico,
Bueno,
Camila from
las
Brazil,
dejo,
and
les agradezco
Luciana from
muchísimo y espero
Argentina.
encontrarnos nuevamente pronto.
So I'll leave you now with these pre-recorded testimonials. Hello, everyone. I'm Simon Marquez. I'm the director of the National Public Health Institute in Mexico. I'm very pleased today to extend a warm greeting and to celebrate this first year of Colansa. It's a great initiative by Idec Brazil, and we have the pleasure of participating together with other countries from Latin America. That allows us to share the best practices, studies, and also to identify barriers and hurdles so that we can transform food systems. In Mexico, our participation was key, for example, for having changes in the front of package labeling, digital marketing, regulation of points of sales, as well as marketing directed to children, amongst many other policies. We have also participated in providing services to other countries, sharing what has worked for us. That's why, to me, Colansa is one of the best initiatives, a very pertinent initiative that allows us to, as countries that are very close, so that we do not need to wait and to repeat the same mistakes. And I hope that this experience continues for a long, long time. I'd like to emphasize the role of the researchers, and I expect them to continue in collaborating. So congratulations, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. As Colansa, we can talk about how Colansa can contribute for food systems. Actually, I'm from Uruguay, and here in Uruguay, we have a few policies that can favor all these changes. We export food. We also produce food to feed 19 million people, and our population is only 3 million. So supply is not an issue, but how can we explain that such a country, we still have 91% of the population consuming less than 5 portions of fruits and vegetables amongst the population with age between 15 and 65? And how can you explain the high consumption of ultra-processed foods? Not the entire population has access or enough funds so that they can afford for a healthy diet. We had the impact of the pandemic for sure, not to mention the increase in the price of fuel, which has once again decreased the purchasing power, increased food insecurity. And we also had stores, low-cost stores that could also provide food to the less privileged population. Uruguay had also launched a series of measures that contributed for improving diet as a factor that can either protect or that can represent a risk factor. But the truth is that over the last 2 years, we actually did not make any progress. On the contrary, we have a food guide that is new, and it indicates that it's important to certainly adopt healthy habits. And since last year, a decree was approved regarding front of packaging labeling. And obviously, that's important for emphasizing the nutrients that are present. That's a demand that food industries should comply with. But we also need to transform this decree into a legislation in order to fight fake advertisement or advertisement that can mislead our population so that our population eat more of fresh foods and less processed foods. Obviously, we need to address conflict of interest and also successful strategies that can be replicated in this region and that could be used for coming up with new policies that can then improve also the access of healthy foods and decrease the obesogenic environment. We know that diet nutrition is a very complex issue, and there are multiple factors that should be considered: education, the economy, nutrition, production, and also to decide what kind of society we want to have in the future. But it's important that we coordinate and articulate different actions. It's important to have that well organized. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. And certainly that also evokes human rights. I believe that Colansa can help us by promoting exchanges of evidence of initiatives taken in the public area. We, for example, can discuss how we can fight every hurdle for having a good food system. We also need to address conflict of interest that is found everywhere. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we do have successful stories. What we see is that each country has been successful in some context. For example, the production of food guidelines, front of package labeling with some warnings and alerts, or a retaxation of some products. Also, with incorporation of agroecological processes in food production. But what we want is to have healthier, more sustainable food systems in our region. But it took social mobilization and also protection of the policies in order to fight transnational companies that have some other interests. In this region, we had the opportunity to use a new PAHO tool in addressing these conflicts in nutrition programs that can help us to face this challenge and to achieve more systemic changes. So as for this means to promote this discussion, this exchange, it also allows us to be more strategic, to create a virtual circle that can also help us in developing policies and in the decision-making process so that we can transform these food systems in order to promote health, sustainability, and social equity. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Luciana Castronovo, and I'm the coordinator of research at the Inter-American Heart Institute in Argentina. I'd like to greet Colansa for its first anniversary and also to commend everyone for this initiative, which is to change food systems. In this sense, the work of Colansa is key so that we can promote the exchange of the different experiences carried out in this region and to think about how we feed ourselves. With regard to food systems, that implies not only developing new research tools with the purpose of understanding the causes and consequences of such practices that today are commonly found in our environment, considering the production up to its supply. and also to consider public policies that allows us to have a healthier, more sustainable food systems. In that sense, it's necessary to have the articulation of different stakeholders, be it in production, food science, and it's key and necessary so that we can certainly improve our systems. Colansa's work is key so that we can promote this synergy between different stakeholders in different countries and different systems. We believe that we have succeeded, for example, with regard to the front of packaging labeling, owing in part for the dialogue between the different organizations present in this region that have allowed others to also progress. This work, this collaborative work has also allowed Latin America to today have our set examples for the entire world. I know that we have future challenges, which is to ensure that the entire population has access to sustainable, healthy foods. In that sense, we certainly takes articulation of different stakeholders, and that's why Colansa's work is so fundamental. Well, we are coming to the end of this event. I'm very, very happy with the participation and for having you joining us, the panelists. It was really great to hear the testimonials of Colansa members. That certainly excites us very much. Our agenda is very challenging, as we all know. And that's why we certainly need this positive energy. It takes not only energy, but also teamwork. And little by little, we have been supporting each other. And now, after 1 year, we feel stronger as a team, as a coalition, in fighting for more sustainable and healthier foods. And I hope that you feel the same, that you feel as excited as I am, that we have carried out good work. We have concluded this project, but this certainly does not determine the end. On the contrary, this is just the starting point so that we can keep on fighting in order to change food systems. The same applies to Colansa. We understand that this regional articulation, in order to promote this kind of change, really Colansa provides us with that environment. So I'd like to thank Colansa members. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Once again, IDRC, Wellcome Trust, our partners. And let's continue together. Thank you